This campaign is called Tough Times from the Heart, giving a greater awareness around suicide prevention. And this is Alannah McGregor. Alannah knows the pain all too well. She lost two children to suicide, Angela and Stuart. And in the last 2 decades, Alannah has been trying to change the way that we talk about suicide, trying to change the language around it. How do you feel about talking about this? You know, it's been 20 years now. When someone brings it up, as I'm bringing it up to you right now, how does that make you feel?
It's okay now. Early on it wasn't okay. It was really, really difficult to think of Stu and Ange without just feeling the pain and the loss, whereas after about 6 to 8 years I got to a stage where I could remember happy memories and smile. That was a really good turning point.
I wanted to ask you that. Where are you at now? Like, when we talk about it, how do you feel about it now?
Accepted and using it for a better life for others.
There is a certain kind of pain that seems to come along with suicides for the families and the people who love them. It is just probably one of the reasons why there's been a bit of stigma around suicide for so long, because the pain's unique, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of guilt and questions that wouldn't come with another type of death.
Yeah. How do we change that conversation then? Because how do you want people to start talking about it now?
Don't be afraid. It's quite daunting to go up to someone and say to them, I'm sorry about your loss, or do you want to talk to me about it? But that's what those people want. They want you to say the name of their loved one and to talk about them, and don't be afraid to do that.
When you lost Stuart and Angela, you had people that would avoid you.
Definitely. Yeah. We lost some really good friends.
You lost some friends?
Yeah.
Because you felt you couldn't go back to them?
No, because they felt they couldn't come to us.
Oh,
yeah. They just didn't know how to deal with us or deal with our pain and grief. And
whether, but you lose someone in a car crash, you lose someone to cancer, it's different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Different for them.
Different for them too. There was a lot of gossip, there was a lot of innuendo about a family who lose 2 children, and people sort of blamed us. Like our next door neighbour was asked, well, you live next door to them, what kind of people are they? And thankfully he said that we were normal people, just like you and me. So.
I imagine there'd be, looking at it from a charitable point of view, there'd be a lot of fear in it, though, wouldn't there?
Yeah.
And almost a curiosity to say, well, and I think suicide brings a lot of curiosity to people, where they think, and it's one of those things that everyone's sort of got a bit of an opinion on. Yep. They say, oh, well, I could never do that, or something, or I knew such and such that did that. There was, everyone sort of got that kind of opinion, and that's part of that stigma, isn't it?
Yeah, we get people saying it's selfish, or Stacey had a lot of bullying about that, like that it's a selfish thing to do and you don't deserve the sympathy, which was really harsh. But I also think that, like you were saying, the curiosity, it's a bit awful, really. They want to know the hows and the whys and really want to get into it, which is personal and private.
But that's that fear, though. I think there are a lot of people that are perhaps a hell of in a lot worse space than what we thought, and they're afraid, and they want to know how they don't go down that same path, perhaps.
That's one of my what ifs and if onlys. I look back and I think about Angela, and I wish that I hadn't have been so afraid to ask her how she was going with everything that was going on with Stu. I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to cope with another unwell child. So she seemed to be coping, so I left it at that. And that's a huge regret.
I can understand that being a regret, but that would be I don't want to use the word standard, but that wouldn't be rare, where people said they seemed fine.
Yeah, definitely.
They seemed happy. I
was relieved. Stacey's unwell. She's got a medical condition that meant she was in hospital a lot. Stuart was mentally unwell. Ange seemed fine. And it was like, thank God. Yeah.
Thank God. Don't mess with it. Would have been
the
pretty
thinking. Much.
As a parent, you think, well, hey, don't rock it. We're all right here.
In hindsight, I've done a lot of counselling and work on forgive yourself for what you did wrong and forgive yourself for what you perceived to have done wrong.
Alannah, that's not just for parents though, is it? Because I remember there was someone that I worked with years ago, and we didn't work closely together. It was just a hello in the corridor kind of thing. And he came up to me one day and he said, "G'day Justin, how are you mate?" Gave me almost a hug and said, "Hey, how you doing? You been all right? How's the kids?" That kind of a thing. We'd never had a conversation like that before. He killed himself 2 days later. And this wasn't about me, but I'm sure that he had done it to other people, but they talk about that sort of elevation of a mood just before people make that decision. So how the hell do you combat that? How the hell do you say, "Oh, he just said hello to me"?
And was that an invitation for you to ask how he is?
And I asked him how he was. I said, how are you going? "Oh, yeah." But how the hell would I pick up on that kind of thing to say, "Oh, we better go and check him out because he was happy"?
Whereas Stuart, we knew that he was suicidal. We knew he was suffering for quite some time. We were terrified for a long time that he might take his life. But Ange just seemed to be bouncing along like any 15, 16-year-old was.
So the lesson there, isn't it, that is that it can be impossible to tell, but there are still signs. And when people ask you about it, when you talk about it, how do you describe the signs?
So for Stuart, it was anger at times, or one particular day he put a paper bag over his head and cut the eyes out because he felt that we wouldn't want to look at him. That's how low his self-esteem was. Whereas Ange was, because she knew a lot of what had happened to Stuart that we didn't know, he hadn't told us, he'd told her, I guess she internalised, and when he was very unwell and what we would say behaving badly, smoking marijuana and a bit violent at home and stuff like that, she would go into a room and turn music up. So I guess that's a sign now, in hindsight, that perhaps she wasn't coping with how he was behaving, and I would now go into her room and say, how are you dealing with all this? Whereas at that time I didn't think to do that.
You mustn't. I'm sure you come to terms with this in a certain way, but you mustn't.
Yeah. No, I don't. I don't now, but at the time. In that process of working out, how did this go wrong, I did a lot of counselling on that, and I have forgiven myself for not knowing to ask her.
We spent a lot of years, when I started in journalism, is you don't talk about suicide.
No.
So if someone takes and I started journalism in a rural setting, is where everybody knows everybody. Mm-hmm. So if someone take their own life, you didn't even talk about the death at all. No. It was just it was nothing. And then we went through a period where we would hint at the suicide.
The little thing down the bottom that says ring Lifeline.
Call Lifeline, and then you say, "Oh, I wonder what happened to this person." Look at the bottom, call Lifeline. Oh, okay. Yeah. We've got to get over that, haven't we? Yeah. We've got to move past that.
Definitely. And we really need to work on the language around it too.
What do you want to change? What bits specifically?
Committed suicide. All those horrible, probably don't want it in their thing, but top themselves, stuff like that. All those horrible things that people say. Taya's finished school now, but she used to say that kids at school would text, "Oh, go kill yourself," to each other all the time. They need to realise the seriousness of what's behind that.
Because there is very much a not going to happen to me with this, isn't there? And suicide almost becomes something you talk about in the abstract. You know, it's not
Yeah.
something you're talking about in reality.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And sadly, it's probably only people who have known someone that you do realise the seriousness of it, and that the way you've spoken about it in the past yourself, maybe, that you need to change.
Is there a subtle difference from what you see, or possibly less than subtle difference, between someone just not wanting to be alive anymore and somebody wanting to take their own life?
Definitely. I think the wanting to take your own life is often a reactionary thought, whereas the first one you said...
Yeah, just not wanting to be here anymore.
And
yeah.
I'd say that would be somebody who's probably suffered for a long time, tried so many different things to help themselves, and just had enough.
Where do we need to change this language? I mean, who is it up to? It's professionals, it's through the media, but it's how we sort of interact every day, isn't it? That it needs to...
education.
Where it needs to start, yeah.
Things like Are You OK Day, Mental Health Week, those sort of things do it, but it's usually only on the day and then forgotten about.
We need to change the language around it completely. We've come a long way with mental health, though, haven't we?
Yeah, definitely.
You know? And we were talking about years ago is if somebody had died, they left out suicide, and it was almost as though they had passed away from some form of an accident or had just died.
Yeah.
And, you know, family members would say, oh, whatever happened to old Uncle Bill or whatever? Oh, I just died. Just died, you know.
When Angela died, the funeral directors suggested to us, when you put something in the paper, we have some wording that will help if you don't want people to know. And I straight away had my back up and thought, no, people will know. And we worded it in a way that they knew.
Do people find it a little confronting when you talk to them about it in such a straight...
Early on, definitely, because I wasn't very subtle about it. I was quite in your face about it, and I've learned to be a bit nicer. But yes, people who would say to me, oh, how are you doing? And I'd sort of like, well, I'm okay, thanks, she lied. Like, how do you think I'm doing? This is in the early weeks. Like, just platitudes are really hurtful.
And that does come through that stigma.
Not knowing what to say.
And the fear and the stigma, and the dirty little secret feeling behind it, isn't there?
Because Stu and Ange died a month apart, and people gossiped. It was really awful gossip, and that was, I used to say, forgive them for they know not what they do. And there was a little sarcasm in me saying that, but it was also trying to make some sense of why they were gossiping like they were about us.
This sort of business about copycats, that, you know, if we do talk about it, particularly through, you know, if we talk about it openly in the media, that is going to encourage people to do it, you know, and that's not, we're not going back decades when that was the thinking. We're going back, you know, years and months, and it's still in many circles in the media that is still the feeling behind it. That's got to get busted down, surely.
Definitely, yeah, and that's one of the things that we do with SPAN. We really try and push that, reducing the stigma and talking openly and getting out there with the media. So, yeah.
Because there's an air, I think there, you know, for me, there feels like there's an air of failure towards suicide. And people don't like to talk about failure, and they see whether it's a failure of the person themselves or whether it's a failure of the family, failure of the workplace, whatever. And it's an area that we try not to muck around in, but we've got to, because we're not fixing it. We're going to lose more people, aren't we?
Yep, and absolutely every family member or loved one who's lost someone to suicide will feel that failure. They'll feel that they failed to see it or failed to help enough. I remember thinking that I wasn't a good enough parent, that I didn't love the children enough. And you have to go through that questioning and get to the other side of it, but it's a pretty awful thing that you'd have to go through it.
You have that conversation with people, as in other people that have lost children and loved ones. They all tell a similar tale.
Yes.
Yeah.
everybody has those questions and what ifs and if onlys and I should have seen it, and yeah.
And you could say to someone who's watching this right now, who's thinking of taking their own life, you could say, well, look at the pain that gets left behind, look at the questions that get left behind. But they're not thinking in the right mind, are they?
No.
And we're almost trying to think of them as being in the right mind, who are just making a bad decision. That's not helping, is it?
No, they're not capable of making the decisions at that stage. Their mind is in a state that they're not thinking clearly enough to make the decision to take their life or make the decision to save their life. They need help.
And when you talk to people, and I know that you've talked to people who have contemplated suicide or are still in the throes of that sort of darkness, what's that first thing that you try to tell them?
Simply, tough times pass, that it might not be as bad tomorrow, or even if it's as bad tomorrow, the next week it might not be as bad, and just do 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time. Try and keep it simple.
And then it's going to change, it's going to get better.
Well, it usually does.
Yeah.
Perhaps sometimes you can't save everybody, but
Yeah.
most people's problems and whatever it is that they're going through, it seems overwhelming and it seems like it will never improve. But most of the time they do get improvement.
Talking about suicide, because we will talk about alcohol and driving, we'll talk about speeding, then we'll talk about using mobile phones in cars, and then there will be a cancer particularly that will come into the limelight, like something like breast cancer, and that will sort of have its time. Suicide prevention doesn't tend to get that same kind of run, does it? It doesn't.
No.
People react very, very differently to it.
Yeah, probably Robin Williams would be the only one that I would have thought did cause some talking, some questions and people really thinking more about it.
But still, it sort of goes back. It's like snapping back a rubber band, isn't it? You know, you pull it, you get to a point, then you let it go, and it just goes back to zero again. I don't want to be negative about it, but it does sometimes feel like with this conversation we're starting a little at zero sometimes.
Definitely, and I think that we start at 0 and then we get to 10 and then we go back to 1.
Yeah. And what is that? Is that the fear? Is that the
Definitely.
fear that lives
so.
inside of everybody?
I think people are afraid that it could happen to them, that, this could be something that I have to live with. It could be, what do I do if I'm in that situation?
Yeah, things like, how do you think things like the internet, texting, social media, how do you think that what's that done to...
Again, I'll talk about my granddaughter, and it's just horrific, some of the things that students and young people say to each other, and they just don't seem to see the consequence of what they do and say, and the bullying online, and there just doesn't seem to be any understanding of the severity of what they say and do.
If you were in person, you wouldn't say to someone, look, go kill yourself. No. But you click the text button and you think, this is, this'll, it's, and it could have actually been a joke. Well, you know how teenage minds work, they're a little all over the place, aren't they? And, it could have been a joke, but it doesn't.
But they don't know what the other person's actually going through. They don't know what's happened in their life that could be a trigger.
Because it's a little, that comes back a little bit of that human connection, doesn't it? Yeah. And, we've just lived through, COVID, not exactly over yet, but it's sort of still there. But things like Zoom meetings and we've a lot of that human connection has, whether we've become a little lazy or we think it's going to be the new world, but we can't just forget what it's like to sort of reach across the table and touch somebody.
Yeah, and you hide behind the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It makes it a little bit easier to be cruel.
Yeah.
Or to give, and you mentioned the word, which is a good word, platitudes, and it makes it a little bit easier to give platitudes, to send a text to say, what's up, Hope you're doing
Are you
okay.
okay?
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Question mark, hit send, and then it's all forgotten. Where it's a little bit different to go and visit somebody.
When you see somebody who's got bags under their eyes and their shoulders are slumped, and you can see that body language and you know that they're not okay, whereas a text, you can't see that.
Is that an important thing? You're looking for those physical signs, like you say, the bags under the eyes. And when you're talking to somebody and they say, "Look, I'm struggling. I'm not doing well here." Not everybody's good at responding to that, are they?
When I talk to people at functions, I always say about asking the question, don't be afraid to use the word suicide. Do you think you're suicidal? Are you thinking? Have you made a plan? But before you ask, make sure you're prepared for the answer, because you have to know what to say if you get a yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's probably something that education would be really good with for the future.
It's a really good point. Should we look at that in schools, where it's not just what to do yourself when you're feeling this way and you're in those dark places, but when you recognise those, and somebody says to you, "Listen, I'm feeling pretty goddamn awful here."
Yeah. Yeah. Again, my granddaughter has done that with some of her friends. She's recognised and she said, "Do you want me to get my grand to talk to you?" Or she will help you talk to your mum about it. And so she's learned from that experience that she's lived, but she is an absolute wonderful advocate in that area.
The kind of wisdom that I bet you wish she didn't really have.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that she's learned from it.
That's what it's about, isn't it? Is that if we can pick up little tips along the way, things to recognise, things to say,
Yeah.
the approach to take,
Yeah.
we can really we're not talking about this. We're not sitting here, talking about it as an academic exercise, are we? We're
No,
talking
it's
about
real.
actually saving some lives.
And even if somebody's not suicidal, helping them to feel better and not be so sad or stressed or anxious all the time. It doesn't have to be about suicide. You can ask someone how they're feeling and help them in that way.
There's so much pressure on people, isn't there? Like, there's just
Yeah.
a heap of pressure on people to do well, to be a certain way, to wear certain clothes, and even I think there's a pressure now on people to feel a certain way or to think a certain way, and when they're not quite coming up to that expectation,
And
they
TikToks and things like that telling them how they should be, and social media again.
like an Instagram where a person is sort of posing, on a beach, but we really have no idea what's going on in their life. All we see is the beach and the person looking
That's
terrific.
interesting.
We don't think, oh, well, this person's just taken 78 photos to get
the right one.
to get the good one. We only look at that.
Yeah. And we all hide behind a mask, and that's something that I used to do. I never used to wear makeup, and when Stuart became unwell, I started to wear makeup, and that was my mask. I could put on makeup and people wouldn't see what I was going through, and I could actually manage to get through a day without crying because I've got this mask on.
Do you think that was a good thing or a bad thing?
Good at the time.
Good at the time, yeah.
Yeah. Probably would have been good if I didn't have to wear a mask and people recognised that we were struggling. Because for the 2 years that he was unwell, we were in crisis. We were in absolute crisis and had no idea how to go forward and help.
I went through a particularly rough time a few years ago, and I remember that I would go to work. Now, I didn't have the physical makeup, but you'd have the smile and everything, and things that I knew I needed to say and things I needed to get done, and then get in the car, burst into tears, and cry all the way home.
Wayne Swash says the same thing.
Yes, he does, doesn't he? Yeah. And just cry all the way home, and then you get home and you've got a family, and you sort of stick the mask back on.
Or you don't.
Bit. Or you don't,
Because that was one of the things that I really struggled with when Stuart was unwell. He managed to get his day at work and be nice to everybody, and he came home and he wasn't nice to be around.
Yeah.
And I spoke to counsellors at times and said, I just don't understand it. How come he can be okay, yet he's not okay? Like, you can't turn it on and turn it off.
And which one's real?
But they said that it was, he works so hard to be okay when he's out in the public that he lets that mask down and you cop it, type of thing. So, yeah, you either, like you did, wear the mask for the family, or like Stuart did, he let that mask go and just fell to pieces.
Everyone's and like I say, you're there guessing, and everyone who knows him is guessing which one's the real, which one's reality. Like I'm talking about before you got, that answered for you. You're looking. And
I used to think that he was just playing up for us, or yeah. Why do you treat us like this? You don't treat your friends like that.
Yeah. When you talk to him and you ask him that question, what did he say to you?
He didn't know.
He didn't know.
No, he didn't know. And that's when he would then go down into the fetal position and cry, and I wished I didn't do that to you, and I'm so sorry. And his mood swings were everywhere.
And I guess the signs are something like that, and something so incredibly subtle. Like I was talking about the person before who, was happy, and almost had a sense of relief. Something that they had, whether they had made a decision or what the hell was going on. But this is what makes it so confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that is something you look for now. If you know somebody who's been down and suddenly they're not, then that's a sign and something you should be looking towards, getting them that extra help. But if it's someone like Angela, perhaps, who always seemed to be going okay, it was a lot harder to pick up that she's not doing that well.
That can be even tougher, can't it?
Definitely.
Far tougher than the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you this again, if it's all right. How do we change the conversation? How do we get people talking about it? Not just like this, but just every single day. When somebody says, "Are you okay?" and the answer's no, or even before that happens, how do we just get people talking about it?
I really think it's getting past that fear of what you're going to hear if you do ask that question. I think that people need to educate themselves that I know what to do if I do come across somebody. I know to tell them to go to their GP or ask them, do you want me to sit with you for X amount of time, and things like that. So if you've prepared yourself, it's not as hard to make that presentation to the person.
We need to be better. Do we need to be better mates?
Yeah, of course. And everybody's so busy. It's my life's more important than anybody else's. So we do need to be much more friendly towards each other.
You must have talked to people that have lost someone, like say from not a family member but a friend, and they think, "Oh God, he called me 2 days ago. I didn't call him back. We just didn't get around to chatting."
Yeah.
And not that it is their fault in any way, shape, or form, but still that kind of connection.
Yeah, and I think I would say to that is, if you feel like you need to do that, somebody that you might need to catch up with, reach out to, don't put it off, just go out and do it straight away.
That's a really good point, relying on your instincts a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So my instinct is that this person is not doing very well.
Yeah.
Don't
say, I must
don't
call
guess.
him.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah.
There's
a bit of a danger in, I think there's a danger in the text, to say, how you doing? Because it's easy for them to send the thumbs up without actually responding.
Yeah, definitely. And if somebody sees that you genuinely want to know how they're doing, and you can see that in the body language. I remember hearing a school principal say, listen with your ears, listen with your eyes, and listen with your heart. Because it's often not just in the words spoken. And that really resonates with what we would like people to do when they're asking how somebody is.
Those corny old things of love and kindness keep coming around, don't they?
Yeah. He used to say that at the school assembly every Monday, and you hope it went through into those kids and they learned it.
Is that something that we don't teach? Is it something that we don't spend enough time teaching, which is this is how we love people and this is how we're kind to people?
Especially young people who watch TikToks and watch TV shows all the time, reality TV shows. That's not real life and not real love. It's far
Because
from.
you think about the parent of the child that sent a text saying, go kill yourself, to someone that they know. That parent is probably oblivious to the fact that their child was capable of sending something like that.
Yeah.
For whatever reason the child did it, they would be thinking, oh, we didn't, you know, they wouldn't. And they would be horrified to find that out. But, you know, that's kind of something to be on the watch for too, isn't it?
Yeah.
How your child is behaving.
It is, and it's sort of left up to teachers a lot. Teachers have got so much that they have to do. It's a lot to be putting on them that they also then have to look after the mental health of all their students. And I think parents often need to take that step further and make sure that their child, young adult, is behaving nicely to their friends and treating people with the respect they deserve.
Get off your phone and have some conversations with people.
Yeah. Yep.
I sit on a train, you know, sometimes, and you're watching every single solitary person's on in that world, you know. And look, phones are great. I use mine all the time, and they're terrific for communication and for you know, for everything that we use them for. But escaping into that little world where you don't need the kindness of other people, or you don't think you need the kindness of other people, or you don't need to spend the time showing kindness to other people because you're stuck in that little world.
It's not
almost
the real
like,
world.
yeah, it's not, is it? It's almost like escaping into drugs, you know, where people will escape into drugs because it stops them from having to think and deal with those things, kindness, but it all just sort of catches up.
Yeah, I'm sure that they get stuck in their TikToks and their imaginary world that they see on their screens.
How do you show kindness to people? What do you do yourself personally?
If it's somebody I know well enough, hug. If it's not someone I know very well, I just make sure that I give them lots of eye contact and the time to listen to what they're saying, I think is really important.
Even people you don't know that well, even people you've only just met? And
Yeah, it depends on how you meet them, but like often people listen with the intention of what you're going to answer, and you're not really listening in that case, I think.
Sorry, what did you say?
I think you look like I said the wrong thing.
Can you just repeat that for me? Because I wasn't listening.
Oh,
No, it's so true, isn't it?
I thought you were serious for a second.
I needed to get you to smile. So
Oh,
these are tough things to talk about, though, aren't
Yeah.
they? God, they're hard.
Yeah.
But what we've been doing is think, oh well, it is too, you know, it's the cliche of the too hard basket. Well, we won't talk about it. We'll just sort of see if this can fix itself.
Yeah, and there's that taboo of we don't talk about it because we don't want to know about it, because we don't want to think that it happens in our family or in our community, in our school.
That's back to that failure thing, isn't it? I think it's back to that failure thing. If we talk about it, we are acknowledging failure.
Yeah.
Failures of the families, failure of the friends, failure of the person that did it. So let's not discuss failure because we're not taught to deal with failure. We're only taught to deal with success. So, yeah.
And again, back to someone who died in an accident or something else, an illness. The families have lots of visits. They have, you know, how's Joe Blow doing? Or they get that support, but you don't get that with suicide.
Something like cancer too, there is a kind of a language that gets used in cancer that they say, oh, someone lost their battle with cancer. Well, not really. They were killed by a terrible disease. And we don't tend to look at that the same way for suicide, do we? We're saying, oh, that person lost their battle with mental illness. We would never just sort of talk about it like that, would we?
I always do, so I'm surprised to hear you say that. I always say that Stuart lost his battle, or he succumbed to the suicidal thoughts that he had fought for so long, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Because
Is that a way that we should be talking about it? Is that?
I think it takes a lot of the blame away from that person, that they didn't do this to hurt other people, they didn't do it for any other reason apart from the fact that whatever was going on in their life, became too much.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put that the wrong way.
No.
I think
other people do see it that way, but I've never have.
No. No, I just mean, I think and I meant that in mental illness should be viewed like a cancer, needs to be treated,
Definitely.
needs to be worked on.
And it needs to be treated holistically. You have cancer, you have a specialist, you have cancer nurse, you have somebody come, and if you've had chemo, they give you a wig. Mental health, you go to the psychologist or psychiatrist by yourself, they won't talk to your family, they won't discuss anything at all around that patient's. No, it's just isolated.
And you can have that kind of, how are you feeling today? Actually, I'm not feeling too bad. Great, done, over, fixed.
Don't want to know that.
Tick, problem solved, So, someone went to see a psychologist twice. We asked them how they're feeling. They said they're okay, done.
Yeah. I'm not going to get sued, I'm right.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that happens far too often. And you also get the ones who know that they might get hospitalised, so they go to the psychologist and they say, no, I'm good. They know enough to know that I don't want to get sectioned, so I'll tell them I'm okay, or they know what to say to stop it from looking worse.
Well, there's a generation of people that are geared towards, and for God's sake, don't tell anybody that you're depressed or anxious.
Yeah.
Don't say it, for goodness sake. You may not get that job, or
the insurance to travel.
The insurance, I know the insurance companies have been awful in this area. So
just a simple thing like travel insurance, you can't have with depression. You can get your travel insurance, but if you can't travel because of depression, it's not covered.
Yeah, so we need to start changing. There's a lot to change, isn't there? A lot to fix still.
Yeah.